So again, thank you folks for joining us today. It is a pleasure to be with you here. My name is Ariana Konjerski. I'm an education specialist at Royal Roads University. I am super pleased to be co-hosting the session today with Dr. Elizabeth Childs, who is the professor and program head for the Mallet program at Royal Roads University. It's such a pleasure. Elizabeth, hi, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Ariana. Thank you. And thank you everyone for making time for this today. I know it's fitting in between lunch and other commitments. And for some of you on the East Coast, it's getting more towards the end of the day. So really appreciate you making time to be with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. Just to let everybody participating know, the session is being recorded, and as well, you cannot unmute your microphones, but you are welcome to chat with us. So if you'd like to type in the chat box, maybe where you are coming from today and what the weather is like, because in Victoria, BC, where I am, we love to talk about the weather. So right now it is overcast. I believe it's about 5 degrees. So feel free, pop in the chat where you are coming from today. And of course, the reason we're all here is AI and learning design in education, and we have an awesome discussion for you today. Before we get started, as we do at every webinar and presentation meeting at Royal Roads University, we do like to acknowledge the traditional lands that we are on. So Royal Roads University does acknowledge that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Recepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. We are very grateful to be here where we live, work, and play, and where Indigenous and non-Indigenous staff, students, and faculty come together. So again, thank you all so much for being here. Just a quick agenda for you today before we get started with our wonderful panel. We'll introduce them in just a second. Of course, our welcome, that's what we're doing now. And then we have our panel, so our AI and Learning Design and Education panel. And then we'll just do a quick bit of program information at the end, just to let you know a little bit more about our learning and technology programs at Royal Roads. And then, of course, time for any questions. And again, you can pop any questions throughout the session into the chat box, and we're happy to take those at the end. And without further ado, I know you are all probably wanting to meet our wonderful panelists for today, so we'll just do a quick roundtable here and introduce everybody. Starting off, we have Darren Wilson on the line. Hi, Darren. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Coming to you from Toronto, Ontario.
Perfect.
And it's mild out today. We had a big dump of snow on the weekend.
Excellent. Yes, I heard about that. I heard about that big dump of snow, but thank you so much, Darren, for being here. Next up, we have Keith Webster. How are you today?
Pretty good. Coming from Victoria here, where it's mostly sunny, I'd say.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Keith. And we also have Clint Lalonde. Thank you so much, Clint. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Joining you today from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation, also known as Victoria, British Columbia. There's a few of us from Victoria. I'm always scared to talk about the weather when we're in Victoria, because I know that our weather is an anomaly for people who are living in other parts of the country. But I'm very happy to be here and participating in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Clint. Yeah, our weather is definitely a little bit different than the rest of Canada, that's for sure. And last but not least, of course, Alicia Hadley. Nice to see you.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am beaming in from Victoria as well, just a stone's throw from Royal Roads.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alicia. And we will get to know our panelists, of course, a little bit more as we go along. But I believe now I will go ahead and pass it off to Elizabeth, and we will have our wonderful discussion.
Super. Thanks so much, Ariana. And again, thank you all for making time for this. One of the things that really resonates with me with the land acknowledgement every time is part of the shared responsibility that comes with that acknowledgement of the land when we think of our virtual spaces and places. And so how can we think about conceptualizing these virtual places and spaces that still adhere to protocols, to places that become safe and foster engagement, and what is our role in creating those places? And so for me, you know, it's such an amazing gift to be able to be here in the Esquimalt and Songhees territories of Lekwungen people, but also to be able to look out, as I do, on my hummingbird feeder and the garden, and also on this computer screen where all of you are, and think about how do we navigate that distance and create spaces that are welcoming. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. It is slightly intimidating to have a panel that says AI and learning and design and education. But I said to all of our panelists, don't worry, it's so new. Nobody knows everything yet. So we are operating from that assumption. And what I've asked all of us to do, and I'm hoping we can really foster this, is it's a conversation between all of us, and hopefully some of you in the chat, if you can get in there and type. We have people representing from very different sectors in our conversation this morning or afternoon. And so I'm going to turn it over to Alicia first. And this sort of just sets the stage, because generative AI and what we're learning about generative AI is really coming fast and furious. And it's hard for everyone to keep up, or let alone be able to think that they're standing on the ground that they know. So what I've asked each of our people that have joined us today to come to talk about is, what does it mean to you in your setting right now? So they're going to do a little bit of an introduction, who they are, where they are, what their sector is, and then how is generative AI being defined in your world right now, and what's a pressing issue or a pressing thing that you're doing with respect to generative AI. So Alicia, I'll turn it over to you to start us off, and thank you again.
All right, well, I feel like we've said thank you so many times, but thank you for honoring us by joining our session today. And I want to open with great humility by saying that I am not an expert, and I think my co-panelists would echo the fact that no one is an expert at this point on AI, and especially the recent developments and the impact and the potential future impact of them. So just to share a little bit about my background, I represent the K-12 sector. I have worked as a K-12 BC teacher for almost 27 years. And initially about 20 years as a campus school teacher, and then transitioned to being an online school administrator. So I am a high school VP for a fairly large BC online school. And about 3 months ago, my admin team came to me and shared, you know, I think we need to talk about this AI thing. It's coming. Like, there are some major public resources that are about to open. So back in November, December, we started that discussion. And one of my very wise colleagues said, I think it's really important that we lead in this conversation, not follow it and chase it, not professing to be experts in it, but acknowledging and opening real dialogue like we're doing here today. Around the topic among our colleagues, among our students, and with our families as well. So a week or two ago, I was drafting a message to send to our students and families, and I titled it AI with AI, Academic Integrity with Artificial Intelligence, or you can flip that the other way as well, and it means the same thing. And just shared very openly that these tools are out there and we're going to explore them with you. They can be used for good, but we need to determine how and when they can be used with integrity. So here we are in this conversation. We started off learning as colleagues, as we're doing here today, sharing that knowledge with our students and families, and learning again. And as we say so often in education, it's an iterative process as we learn more and more each day. And this is the next step, gathering together to share what we know at this point.
Alicia, thank you so much. And I love the modeling that that's doing in your community and with your larger community of stakeholders, right? That this is a journey that we're on together. Thank you for that. Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and let people know where you're from and what generative AI is meaning to you right now.
Sure, thanks, Elizabeth. So I'm Keith Webster, and I'm the Associate Director for Learning Technologies within the Center for Teaching and Educational Technologies at Royal Roads University. And my background, I've taught in various contexts, and I've been an instructional designer and worked the technology side of things as well. And really, in this stage, and I think for some time to come, we're approaching this AI and specifically the ChatGPT tool more as the thing that it is in front of everyone and what it can do and what we're discovering about it, because it's not a technology that we can do a deep dive on. We can't open the lid and look at it and say, well, it's building this and it's doing that and it's doing it this way. That's stuff that isn't really accessible to us right now. And so it's more more useful to just talk with people about it and say, well, here's what it does, here's where it seems to fail, here are some of the possible implications. And really, with the people that we serve at Royal Roads, with instructors in different schools and programs, it's come and talk with some of the liaisons that you have within CTAD. So very importantly, the instructional designers, and to a certain extent, the technologists, but it is right now, it's a design discussion more than a technology discussion.
Super, thanks for that, Keith. And I think that's really at the core of it, right? Even the very best of technologies, there's still, in some ways, they have the most human interaction, right? And that discussion is really needed for that. Darren, I'm going to toss it over to you now.
Thanks. And that's actually a really great segue into what I'm going to talk about. So I teach in post-secondary situation. I teach in the Bachelor of Design program at York University here in Toronto, and also in the Interaction Design program at Sheridan College in Oakville. And been having some really great conversations with colleagues over the last few months, and hearing some of the really interesting ways in which people have been integrating into their classrooms, into their curriculum. We've been pretty pro technology with both of those programs. They are fairly progressive. And so we generally are like pretty good adopters of technology. And so we've kind of dove right in without, well, with some forethought and some consideration, but also really trying to figure out how we can use these technologies to our advantage, and how our students can use them as well. So we've been encouraging our students to engage with the technologies, to use them to automate some of the workflow that they've been engaging in, to do some of the things that typically take a lot of time: generating code, verifying code, doing things like generating images. So in a lot of our work, we're building scenarios, we're building personas, and in that process, our students are spending a lot of time, or typically have spent a lot of time, sitting in front of stock image libraries, trying to find that perfect image. And instead, what we're now encouraging them to do is to use these technologies to build these conversations, to learn how to art direct the technology, and use that as a way to spend more time on the parts of the design process that are actually more human-centric design processes and design activities. So practicing empathy, so allowing the machines to do some of the mundane routine work, but building that empathic process, that empathic practice of design. We think it's been a really, really great, important move forward. And it's been really interesting and exciting to see the sort of seismic change that we've seen over the last few months. I can't remember the last time I saw a technological disruption of this scale since the introduction of the web. And as far as the impact and the reach and the number of different areas of business and education that this is having an impact, we've had a pretty good run of 30 years without major upheaval. So that's why this is like super exciting to be kind of living through this and having these great conversations. And yeah, everybody's learning and figuring it out as we go. So it's super exciting.
Darren, thanks for that. And I know there's some points we're going to come back to in what you've shared. And I think that, we've talked about that before when we came together. We talked about how, that what do you keep from before and what do you pull forward and what do you need to let go of and leave behind? Clint, I'm going to turn it over to you to do our last first orienting question.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I'm really happy to be here. My name is Clint Lalonde. I'm the Director of Open Education for an organization called BC Campus. BC Campus is a support sector for the BC post-secondary system. And we provide some leadership and collaborative services development for post-secondary institutions in British Columbia around the areas of teaching, learning, and educational technologies. So we are very interested in ChatGPT and any new technology that comes along that might impact the post-secondary system. I also wear a dual hat. I'm an instructor here at Royal Roads University in the School of Education and Technology. And so I'm also interested in the ways in which this tool might change or might enhance, or the challenges it might present for me as an educator integrating this into the classroom. How would I use this with my students? Should I use this with my students? What are the ethical concerns? How does this technology, how has it been developed? As Keith had mentioned, like what's going on in that black box? And is it important for us to understand what is happening when we try to understand the sort of epistemological view of how tools like generative AI know what they know, and how that impacts us and how we think and how we approach these problems that we have in education. So there's tons of issues here, tons of potential, tons of possibilities, and I'm really happy that we're going to have an opportunity to unpack some of those today.
Thanks so much, Clint. And that's exactly it. When we met earlier as a panel, just to sort of touch base, we realized that this could quite quickly become a series, because there's each issue that we talked about, or each possibility we talked about, there was so much room to have conversation. What I'm curious about is, what are you seeing as sort of if you had to pick your light of possibility and your area of concern in your setting, what would that be for you? I know, Darren, you were talking a little bit about the possibilities. You might want to, we'll start maybe with you, and please jump in. You don't have to follow an order, but maybe what is one possibility that you're seeing on the ground right now in your classes, and one area of concern that you're either hearing come up from faculty or at those institutions that you're working?
I think some of the possibilities are just that we have the opportunity to train students on a new technology that's just emerging. And that by the time they graduate, they will already have some experience working with it. And I don't anticipate that these technologies are going to go away. They're going to accelerate. They're going to develop even faster. I've heard some talk about the prompt engineering being sort of one of the most important jobs to have emerged in the 21st century. And I was thinking, like, I don't know about that. I think we're probably just a few weeks or months away from complete conversational interfaces. So that's going to go away. But some of my concerns are, obviously we have academic integrity concerns. There's some ethical concerns around sort of how the technologies are used, where the source material comes from, improving students' digital literacy so that they have the critical thinking skills to understand that these tools are not trained to know what is true and what is false. They're just language tools. They're babbling. And so we need to really make sure that they understand that the information that they're getting could actually be false. And even if they ask for citations, those citations could also be false.
I think that's a really great jumping off point, because it speaks to that inherent bias in code, and it speaks to some of the, how do we, in the land of misinformation, how do we understand misinformation in this context? Alicia, is any of that coming up in your setting?
At a practical level, most definitely. As I was writing that letter that I referenced, one of our first letters to our community about academic integrity with artificial intelligence, one of my charming colleagues ran it through ChatGPT to see, how it might edit and refine it. And I got to tell you, it wrote a better letter than me in some ways. It refined some of the formatting beautifully and added a closing paragraph where I hadn't quite got there yet. And I thought to myself, I am not using any of these in this case. It's just going to muddy the water a little bit. But this is what we're experiencing. As soon as we, sort of lifted the lid on this box, our teachers started encountering assignments submitted that were of concern, kind of around every corner and under every rock. So maybe a bit of an over application there, but a number of them, the common flags of, unfortunately, I'm going to just put the word out there, plagiarism, were definitely there. And what resources do we have to look into that at this point? If I were to ask that of our audience today, what would you do if you suspected a student had plagiarized something? I think many of us would say, I'd type quotation mark and copy and paste a phrase, close quotation mark, and just search for it. Well, you're not going to find it any longer if an iterative AI technology was used to do that. So now there are AI checkers, but I might hand it over to one of my co-panelists to explain some of the foibles and weak points of those in themselves. So that's what we're encountering in the trenches, but there is a silver lining that maybe I'll touch on a little bit later.
Oh, I love the suspense. Keith or Clint or Darren, do you want to jump in on that notion of AI checkers? I mean, Keith, you may be seeing this, and Clint, probably across the system, you might be hearing some of this bubbling to the surface. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, having spent the last few years riding the wave of Proctorio, the exam scrutinizer, and turned it in the software or text matching tool, and now we're into this tool, which was quickly followed by some tools that said that they would detect AI generated text. I mean, and this is a very sort of side issue because I don't think this is really going to be a thing for very long. It's just not really possible. But the best ones out there said they had a 10% false positive. And so that's not something we can really run with. But in a deeper sense, you know, when a text matching software finds a match, it tells you where it found the match. And you as a human instructor can go and check that and say, okay, well, here's what I think happened. This person has already cited this author. They probably just forgot to do this citation of this bit here, or it's a, you know, it's a possible teaching moment around something. But with something that's going to claim it says this is with 90% certainty, AI generated text, what are you going to do other than say some other black box has accused you of using this black box to generate this text? And I don't think that that's you know, going to work its way into any kind of respectful relationship between instructor and student. And I don't think it's something we can really take on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Keith. And I love you bringing in the concept of the black box because, you know, in this field, there's been lots of different black boxes over the years: radio, books, television, film. And so, you know, there is a component that for this technology, it really is quite black in there, right? You had said earlier in your opening that we really don't know what's happening inside there. And so being able to create those spaces around, and Darren, I loved your comment about building that digital literacy and fluency with our students and our learners around what, so now what, right? How do we ensure that we're actually getting to the point of the learning and not getting caught up in the checking and the balancing? Clint, what are you seeing across the system on, you know, if you can speak to that or anything else around this piece of the checking?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Keith was talking about here and this sort of whack-a-mole approach that we have to technologies, right? It's so a new technology comes along, students use it to do something. So we come up with another technology that then prevents the students from doing it. And then they find another technology, and then it just kind of goes around and around and around. When really, I think what we want to be talking about is how to do maybe assessments in a different way that don't require us to have these kind of workarounds and other technologies. The other thing I keep in mind too is that I mean, these are not free technologies. These are commercial entities that are in the educational technology space, right? So ChatGPT is being funded right now by a lot of venture capitalist money. There's a lot of money being poured into it. And then there's a lot of money that gets poured into building the tools that check for these kinds of plagiarism. So this is big business, right? And so it becomes sort of a circular thing too with how we're spending the money that we devote to education, you know, to continually do this, that I think we need to consider in this conversation as well. But the alternative assessment piece, I think this might be where we kind of have an opportunity when these things come along to rethink. And I think it happens little by little. It's not sort of like a broad general thing where everybody rethinks. I think every new technology makes a few more people kind of go, well, how can I do this a little differently and assess a little differently? And so I think that's where the conversation can really help with prevention around the whack-a-mole piece.
I love that. And I would agree with you. I mean, we've seen that time and time again as different versions of e-learning and online learning and distributed learning have sort of made their way into this space. It does cause you as an educator to rethink, okay, well, now what am I doing? And I was joking with someone earlier about how, you know, when WebCT came into fruition, the big exciting news was there was a social cafe. And of course, the big disappointment was none of the students went in an LMS to this social cafe. So there are these technologies that we can then spend some time thinking about, okay, what is the possibility? What are the lights of possibility that might cause us to shift our practice in ways that we know actually can deepen learning? And Alicia, you had kind of hinted to some kind of silver lining. So now I'm going to come back to you and ask you to speak a little bit more of that.
Well, I think Clint teed this up nicely. Thanks very much. I'll get back to you with that, appreciation on it. That the silver lining, as my staff, my administrative staff, were just about to have a meltdown on the floor last November, December, sort of leaning out of their chairs like they were going to throw themselves down and go, it's the end of the world. We have no way of ensuring academic integrity, this kind of thing. I said, but here's the silver lining, what you alluded to, Clint. We can rethink what we're assessing. And we mentioned to our staff recently that there are some amazing, beautiful, and Darren, you said it as well, potential uses for these technologies for the good, as long as they're being used with integrity. And I don't know if we mentioned that Gwen was not able to join us today. She was part of this panel, but not able to join. And maybe we can still share in the chat the article that she wrote recently about how we can integrate these incredible technologies to do some of the tasks that are not necessarily what you're targeting with your learning goals or your outcomes, your learning standards. Those definitely need to be addressed by the student, the learner personally, but there are a lot of things integrated that are unrelated to those learning goals that we can use the technology for. So in my mind, we're going to be flipping assessment on its head in a way, and assessing things that are more multi-stage, where we can track the progression, multimedia, different formats, and synthesizing things with personal application. That's deep, meaningful learning in my mind. And the other thing that we're sort of batting around within my organization, because we almost exclusively offer blended and hybrid learning for our students, is really knowing your students. So when something comes along that does raise a flag, you know the student, you know the history. And I realize that's not an answer that's going to, in a blanket way, address some of the fully online learning and some of the more isolated courses, but there are some beautiful silver linings in there.
I think one of the other silver linings is that none of the people on this panel have once mentioned that we want to ban these technologies and remove them from the classroom entirely. We're all looking at ways to embrace them and work with them. And I've been reading some conversations recently about how, if our projects or our assignments, our essays, our exams can be passed by one of these generative AI tools, should we maybe reconsider the nature of that form of assessment, that type of work that we're giving our students, and maybe do something that's maybe a little bit more meaningful and more relevant to the kind of skills that they actually need, and figure out ways to introduce or integrate these technologies into that. It's like using a digital calculator for math. I mean, it's an enhancement tool. You still have to know the equation to put into it. It's just going to do the hard work for you. So it's going to be really interesting to see how we can embrace and pivot with some of these technologies.
And it's a great time to have the conversations around what is important in the adoption of this technology. Like for, say, the example of the calculator, where you still had to have that sort of background mathematical sense of, this answer I'm getting is out of scale. I have pressed too many digits perhaps on the calculator, that sort of thing. So you still are able to touch back and say, yes, this tool is great, and it's getting students, learners farther, faster, but maybe there are these core things we also have to be sure are handled. And I suspect 2 years from now, we might be having this kind of conversation about AI generated content around saying, yes, it lets students go move further, but we still needed to ground things in 1 or 2 or 3 things that we discovered are easily missed if we move forward with this.
Well, and I think going through all of these threads is that also knowing your audience, right? Knowing your learner. Alicia, to your point, yes, in your setting, it may be easier to know that, right? But also when you think of that, building that digital fluency piece, both for faculty, for instructional designers, subject matter experts, K-12 teachers, pick the role. you really do need to know that learner piece. And so you can really support in a way that's meaningful and relevant to them. Because, there's one question in the chat about, what if I'm working with my SME and my SME says, here's my course outline, I just did it on AI, can we just run with this? Where is that point where you intervene as an instructional designer, and what conversations are you having? Not dissimilar to teaching a research course where students might say, you know what, I'm just going to use AI to code the data. Tricky, because you're writing this up and it's your name that's going on the document. So that's your professional reputation, but you've allowed something else in a black box to make initial sense of the data that you collected from humans. So lots of this teasing out still to be done. Clint, I popped in the chat the blog post that you wrote about ChatGPT and open. And I'm wondering if you wanted to sort of transition. I know we're going to speak a little bit more about what resources are you finding useful right now, top of mind. And I know we've got some great questions in the chat, but I thought, let's maybe steer us to that part of the conversation for a little bit.
Sure. Open education is a huge area I work in. And for those who are not maybe familiar with what open education is, and specifically open educational resources, these are teaching and learning resources that are made available with a special kind of copyright license called a Creative Commons license. And the intent behind this is to make them free and re-editable by anyone without having to ask permission ahead of time. And so the result of this, one of the examples that we have and that we work on here in British Columbia at BC campus is an open textbook project. So we're able to, as part of open education, create through grants with authors, all of these open textbooks that educators can then take and use for free. So saving students, I think we've saved over $30 million for post-secondary students in British Columbia through our open textbook initiative. So I'm really interested in how generative AI can be used as part of the grant the OER grants that we provide to the system to create these resources. And we're grappling with some issues around things like copyright. Who owns the content that's created by ChatGPT? I mean, there's legally it's still kind of a gray area, and depending on your jurisdiction, if you're in Canada, the US, around the world, it's a little bit different. But do the people who create the prompts have a claim for copyright around that, or do the programmers have claims around copyright around that content? So those are some of the pieces that we're grappling with around open educational resources. But the other thing that we're grappling with too is around this idea of authority and academic integrity in terms of how does the AI know what it knows? There's a big piece in academia around citing your sources, right? It's a cornerstone of academic work, is being able to follow the path back to show how you know what you're claiming you know. And ChatGPT does not do that. It doesn't do that well, as Darren alluded to. In some cases, it even just makes up citations. And nobody knows how the data is gathered, really. It's gathered from the internet, but we don't really know what the corpus is that trains the generative AIs. And so that has some implications too around the bias of the answers that you're getting. Depending on the corpus that the AI trains on, there could be a whole bunch of biases kind of built into that and the responses that you get. There's been some examples where, ChatGPT assumes that when you talk about anything with a medical scenario and the doctors are male. And so that's a bias that is built in because of the corpus that the tool is built upon. So those are some of the issues that we're grappling with around open educational resources.
Yeah, I think a philosophical approach that you have to understand, and this is one of the things that I've read several articles and understand the large language model working on text prediction. If I have this phrase, the next likely word is this one. That's a very different model for designing, an AI machine as opposed to the machines that were designed to win at chess matches. And those machines had strategy programmed into them. And this is not about strategy. It knows grammar and it knows what the internet's saying, but it's not even consulting the internet. It's consulting what it's put away of a large enough sample of these passages.
I think that's a really great point, Keith and Clint, because one of the comments, and I'm just going to try to weave it in a little bit here in the conversation, but we've got this big business of AI and then the big data implications. Shouldn't we know a bit more about that before we enter in this space? And then there's another comment around, I love the assessment flipping on its head, but my faculty are pushing back. And so some of that pushback might be also connected to, shouldn't we know a bit more about this? And how are you all finding that in your different places of work? Like, where is that resistance coming from, if you had to sort of name it?
I'll address the question about that additional work of changing our assessment, because that's valid. And it's definitely, if it's not being stated to me directly yet, I know it's being said in the staff rooms, and that communication is going on. I think it's a gradual process. I don't think that we can stand by and wait and not do anything, because the rubber has already hit the road. I referenced in preparation for this session the fact that we are very much building this plane in flight, like we so often seem to in education. We do need to be prepared to implement some changes and share some information. And the approach we took was opening dialogue and saying, this dialogue is going to continue because we're learning as we go. Just being here today, I've learned a few new things. Thank you to my amazing colleagues here. So as far as flipping assessment on its head, that's actually what I'm most excited about in this turn of events, that there's an opportunity to impact some of what I believe are fundamental good teaching practices that, I'm sorry, there's a lot of post-secondary representation here, but I'm just going to say K-12 has been trying to move toward a number of different pedagogical models like problem-based learning and design thinking and those things that don't necessarily trickle all the way up just yet. And this may force some of those changes to the multi-step, really cross-curricular integrated approaches and personal applications of the learning, that deep learning. So my hope is, I keep telling my staff that you might be able to assess fewer items at greater depth in the multi-stages and steps. So that's the consolation prize to the fact that there's some work to be done as we look at our major rocks in our design of our courses, what might need to be changed or modified, even how we weight our grading potentially. So those are all considerations. I'm sorry, I don't have a hard and fast answer on that, but sharing some of those consolations maybe will help too.
Thanks, Alicia. And I don't think, I think the other thing I would share, my observation is, I don't think we need to apologize for not knowing. I think that that sort of creates a scarcity mindset, right? And I think the reality is there is a lot to know, and together we're better learning together with this. And I think that that's really powerful, how you're working with your staff around, yes, it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work to change, period. And to change assessment, and it's the thinking work, particularly on the assessment front, right? Because you're really digging down to, and Miranda has a great example in the chat, you're really digging down to what actually do they need to do here? And what are the skills, knowledges, and abilities that we need to see them work through and demonstrate, and instead of rushing through the content. So I may be putting words in your mouth, Alicia, but I think part of that personalization and that inter-transdisciplinarity that we strive for in post-secondary is also a recognition that perhaps we could hurry slowly through this content and take some time to get deeper to those core pieces. Darren, I'm wondering, because Miranda's question is particularly about photography, but I'm wondering how your students are receiving the permission to, try this, go try this, instead of scrolling through stock images, go try this. How has that reception been?
I think for our students, it's been a huge win. I think they're kind of recognizing that they get to play with a new toy, a new tool, and they get to learn how to tweak and maybe see images that they haven't used before. I mean, I've been using This Person Does Not Exist for a couple of years now, developing personas, and you get an image of a completely fictitious person who's been generated from pieces. It's a different type of generative AI, and I've been encouraging my students to use that, and they've been absolutely like using it a lot. So yeah, it's really interesting, but there are some other caveats as well. Like we have to be mindful of the idea of authorship. And there was just a case last week that was announced where the United States Copyright Office had denied a copyright claim for someone who had written or developed a graphic novel. So the graphic novel was written by a human author, but all the images for it were generated using Midjourney. And those images could not be copyrighted because there was insufficient evidence of human authorship, was the way that the Copyright Office described it, which I think was a fair assessment, because it's not really a human author. It's kind of a collage that's put together by a machine based on a prompt and some unknown algorithm behind the scenes. So there's a technological intervention there that seems to be doing most of the work. And so in terms of that particular decision, I think that was the right one. But again, that's probably going to evolve as these tools get more and more sophisticated, as there is more opportunity for photographers and artists and illustrators to use their own work as the source of that imagery. I've been talking with some of my friends who are illustrators and photographers, and some of their concerns about copyright and about their images being used as source material without their permission. And I try to frame it as, well, here's an opportunity for you to actually use the tool with your own material to generate new ideas, to do that sketching process. That's kind of the very time-consuming, laborious first phase of any sort of illustration project. Use these tools to do that, like massive generation of new ideas, and then you can handcraft the final image based on sort of what random stuff comes out of the generator. So I think there's a lot of possibilities, but again, we have to be sort of mindful of that idea of authorship and sort of who owns what and where did the content come from, and how do we use it with our own stuff to make better stuff. And that's some of the really interesting things I've been reading about, people feeding their own papers into ChatGPT and getting better results out, kind of like what Alicia was saying with her letter earlier. And where do we draw the line between using a tool like ChatGPT and using something like a very sophisticated grammar checker, for example? Are we concerned about Grammarly? Not really, but it does in some cases kind of have the same result. It's taking the human element and processing it through a set of rules and algorithms to smooth things out and remove any of those idiosyncrasies.
I think that's a lovely example for people to ponder, and it got me thinking, and this is just sort of a gut question, so you you can feel free to not dive in, but where do you see in your areas the role of big G government? Where do you see the role of big P policy as we explore this generative AI space? Is it guidelines? Is it suggestions? Is it a sector approach to, for example, higher ed in British Columbia? Here's our approach to AI and generative AI, and this is what we're going to sort of bound ourselves by because of our quality standards, that are measured at the ministerial level. I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I can weigh in a little bit on some things that I see. For one, I think this issue of copyright and ownership, I think that is clearly an area where the federal government is going to have to weigh in and come up with some rules around that, around the legalities of what that means. In terms of education, I know here in British Columbia, we just have a new digital learning strategy that has been released by the ministry, and a digital literacy framework that goes along with that. And so I know there's going to be some initiatives that are going to come out of that, where we're going to start having these conversations around, and it's not just ChatGPT and AI, it is about technology and education in general. And so I think, the role of the government here is to be a catalyst to bring the right people together in the room, to have the conversations, to be able to come up with, I don't know if it's going to be policy or guidelines, but it will inform thinking within the sector around how to deal with some of these issues and challenges that we have around not only ChatGPT, but technology and education.
And I think another thing that will emerge is as these tools become incorporated within different disciplines in the in actual work, are we ahead of, or are we catching up with how these tools are being used? And similarly, in this case, provincial government is going to need to ensure that whatever guidelines or legislation is in place allows for that. So, I mean, you would think that you would want to be very careful about things like a policy that says this much AI can go into your thesis or dissertation. You would want to protect the credential that's being issued. And so you wouldn't want to get ahead of the rest of the world or the rest of the country on something like that. But similarly, in various disciplines, if if you are workshopping visual arts using an AI tool, and that's what's happening in the discipline, in the workplace, it would be silly to insist, oh, we're not doing that here. You can dabble in that once you get a job. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a thing where we also have to keep an eye on what are the other elements doing, and what is the impact if we get out ahead of ourselves or if we're too much of a laggard.
I think that's a really important point, Keith, the fact that our graduates are going to be working with these tools when they get out there, right? And so, there was talk earlier about banning, and that's why I'm not in favor of banning, is like, if we ban it in school and then someone goes out into the workplace and that they're having to work with these tools, it's like going to carpentry school and banning the use of a saw. But, when you get in the workplace, you're going to be using saws. So you need to know how to use these. So I think there is we definitely need to keep abreast of what's happening in sectors. And I know in sectors like business, for example, AI is used, or marketing and communications. AI is already being used to generate marketing content and copy editing. And Darren, you see it all the time, I'm sure, in your industry where it's coming as well. So, and not even coming, it's here. So I think that you hit upon an important point there, talking about our graduates, preparing our graduates for the world that they're going to work in, and the important role that we have to do that.
Yeah, I think banning any technology just pushes it underground, and people are going to use it anyway. It's really disappointing to see like entire school boards. I think the New York school board, the New York City school board, banned it from all computers within their sort of networks. And that's just going to encourage students to seek out that forbidden fruit and figure out how to use it anyway. And yeah, I think we can take much more productive and proactive approaches to integrating these tools and dealing with them and encouraging the ethical and responsible use of them.
Well said, Darren, well said. I put in the chat, just for those who are curious and interested, and it's from 2020. It's some work done by a collection of folks that are just real deep thinkers in this space. And I love the opening prompt to this, and this notion of, if we're not prepared to actively welcome our robot colleagues, we should at least be prepared to open the door to them. And so I think that's been useful in conversations in my world with different sectoral groups or government or faculty around. So what does opening the door look like for you? What does it look like for you? And back to sort of Alicia's response to the earlier comment about assessment, it's small. It doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, I've just taken on the world. It's, what does it look like to open that door a little bit? And we know historically with any change initiative, especially around technology, it is those small steps that help move that mass towards, okay, the interesting questions that are still unsaid. I'm conscious of the time, but I do have one more question I was hoping to ask all of you, and it can be just a short response if that's easier. For you at this point, what is the one conversation, and maybe it isn't one, but a conversation that you really feel is needed that's yet to be had around generative AI? Anyone can jump in.
This might be far too simplistic, but and I think it's in the works, but how can it be used within ethics within each context? And then how to cite how it was used. We've rolled out a bit of a vague recommendation on this for our organization, saying there are some reasonable ways it can be used. There's some great ways it can be used, but you need to cite how it was used. And when something comes in at this moment that we're concerned about, the thinking that it might have been used, and this might not be the student's own thinking, we ask the question openly of the family, the student and the family. We say, did you use any additional tools, for example, this or this or this? And if so, how? We just let's talk about that. Maybe they were used in a totally appropriate way. Maybe they weren't and it was misunderstood. We did also identify our definition of academic integrity and specifically plagiarism before that. And so far, so good. We've had about half a dozen cases in the past month or so that we've addressed that way. And for the most part, students come clean. Now, these are high school students. Maybe the stakes are lower and their relationship with their teachers are good, but that's been a really positive experience for us.
Thanks for that, Alicia. How about others? What's that conversation?
I think one of the conversations that needs to be had is well, I think there's probably a lot of conversations that need to be had around the ethics of some of the generative AI tools. What happens with the data? There was a really great question that came up in the chat. Laren Helfer asked, what happens to the data that goes into those engines? I mean, you can't get access to any of these tools without signing up for an account. So generally, like anything that you put into those tools is going to be tracked back to an email address or a login or some kind of personal identity. So how is our information being used that we're feeding into these systems? And kind of surprising that a company, an organization called OpenAI has this kind of closed and black box approach to that. And they haven't really told us anything about that. So yeah, my part of my philosophy is be nice to the robots. And because they're probably listening and they're keeping track of everything that we're saying. So so I always end up all my conversations with be nice to the robots.
Keith or Clint, what are the conversations in your space that you think still need to be had, knowing that there's many, but the one?
Yeah, I mean, and so I guess backpacking a bit on what Darren said, I know a long time ago in the past, I had some friends and family friends who lived in countries where there was, I guess, known review of letters leaving the country. And I know a couple of them used to put in a little thing, and please check my spells for the censors to pick up on. But the thing that I'm wanting to keep an open mind, to the future about is, especially with writing, and how writing is important in developing your own cognition, how you write language. What is the future impact, maybe 5 years, 10 years down the road, if this kind of tool is used more and more on the cognitive development of children and young adults? What happens if you never free write your own thing and then massage it into something you might actually put on paper or share with someone, but always have an AI draft that you then change? I think when I free write something, it's very different from me just editing some other draft and saying that's good enough and off we go. So what's that going to look like? And what would we perhaps have to design into curriculum to correct for that? Or is it something that people 100 years from now are going to say, well, that was then, this is now, and this is how we think now?
Excellent point. Thank you. Yes. The End of Absence book keeps coming to mind for those of you who haven't read it yet. It's a fantastic exploration of some of those things, as technologies have come over into our lives over time, what the people who are right in the midst of it have had to make decisions on. Clint, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, again, coming back to sort of the epistemological view of this, of how we know what we know. And to me, the big question is how are we limiting ourselves by using tools that are built upon pre-existing corpuses? I mean, one of the great things about humans is we are incredibly creative and we can think of ways to do things that haven't been thought of before. Can the AI do that? And that is where the creativity comes in. I mean, it's just working on a body of known knowledge already. but where is that new knowledge? How do those pieces get refined to do something truly creative? And so I think that is something that, I'm starting to try to grapple with as the big picture, is how do we limit ourselves when we use these tools that have this limited corpus of knowledge that just gives it, and how does it constrain us instead of opening up possibilities for us?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's that tension, right, between, Darren, your example of students or artists themselves using their own work to then spark that next creative insight. And on the other end of that continuum, that tension of, well, wait a minute, if I'm only talking to this stuff, it's no wonder that I'm not really getting any kind of innovative, exciting ideas. So yeah, I think these are all, again, conversations that I'm looking forward to having over the next little while as we all explore this together. Looking at the time, I know that we'll see. I hope that some of you were able to come up with one resource, because we talked about that, maybe sharing a resource in the chat that people might find useful as they're going about their day, learning more about this in their work. So if you have one of those resources and wanted to pop that in, that would be great. For all of you who've been contributing to the chat, thank you so much. I've been attempting to dabble and bring back in and try to make sure we addressed several of the questions. If there's any burning question that needs to get in there, please put it in. Keith, thanks for adding in those links. That's fantastic. We had the link from Clint's blog post up earlier in the chat, and from Gwen's as well. So there will be some resources there that might be helpful for you as you continue on this journey. And together we explore the adventures and mountains and valleys of generative AI. Ariana, I know that you wanted to come back in here, so I will stop myself from talking and move from the rambling Elizabeth back over to the very clear and focused Ariana. But before I do, I just wanted to say a very big thank you to all of you who've come for this conversation, and to all of our panelists for sparking some new and insightful ideas. One of the benefits of being the MC/host is that I go away with sheets and sheets of paper of, I should follow up on that. I should follow up on that. So I'm hopeful that is what happened for all of you who were part of this as well. So thank you. Ariana, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's so kind. I appreciate you calling me clear and focused. Doesn't always feel that way, but this was a really brilliant conversation. But I'll just share my screen again for folks. Hopefully everybody can see the right screen there. We just want to give you a little bit of info. If you're thinking about the Mallet program or any other learning and technology programs at Royal Roads, we just want to give you a little bit of information to walk away with for some follow-up if you would like to follow up later. So this is just a little bit on how to apply. If you are thinking about applying, there is an online application fee of about $131.39, and we just ask for some supporting documents, so official transcripts, personal statement, structured resume, and letters of reference. And again, there's a lot more information on the application process for Royal Roads programs on our website. So of course, royalroads.ca, be sure to check that out. We do have a few key dates. So for some of the programs in learning and technology, so Masters of Arts in Learning and Technology, the start date's coming up soon. I can't believe it's March already, is March 27th, 2023. And there is still time to get some applications in for that. So if you've been thinking about it, Masters of Arts, of course, in Learning and Technology as well. We also have the 2024 start date, which is March 25th, 2024. And the application deadline for that is December 25th, 2023. So if you need a bit more time, that's also an option on our website. And then the graduate diploma as well in learning and technology. It's also starting March 25th, 2024, and the application deadline is December 25th, 2023.
Thank you so much, Ariana, for that. I wanted to put one more thing, a little bug in people's ear. We do have the Mallet Virtual Symposium, and this year it's the week of April 10th. It's open to anyone. You're welcome to come join. There's a sort of mishmash of live presentations, synchronous presentations, pre-recorded sessions, and there's also all the recordings from the symposium since 2018, 17. So you're more than welcome to log in, to share them, to use them. Some people have used them as professional learning, sort of jump-starting opportunities for their staff or their colleagues. So just know that they're there. And I will put the link. Oh, maybe someone is putting that in the chat. I will put the link to it in the chat so you have it. But we'd be happy to see you and happy to have you join. Sorry, Ariana, go ahead.
No, it's all good. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, we have a little bit on that at the end. I believe the link is at the end, so we'll share that with folks. Just to let people know as well, there is services available to you if you are thinking about applying to any of those programs or any program at Royal Roads. There are some financial aid and award services, so things like loans, bursaries, scholarships. That's available at royalroads.ca/admission/financial aid awards. Of course, you could pop that into a search engine. And we also have enrollment services. They are fantastic, but I'm biased. It's learn.more at royalroads.ca. If you have any questions about admissions, program options, questions about your application, or you can connect with students and alumni as well, who are fantastic. And with that, we will say, of course, thank you. I just want to give a big thank you to, of course, Elizabeth, of course, all of our panelists. You're fantastic. I'm always thrilled to, yes, a round of applause. I'm always thrilled to sit in a room with these brilliant people. So again, thank you so much. Like Elizabeth mentioned, the Mallet Virtual Symposium is coming up April 10th to 14th. There is a link for that, and I can share that along in the follow-up with the resources as well. If folks are interested, please come on down. We will have more webinars in the future, so stay tuned in the coming months for those. We might have to have a part 2 of this one because I feel like there was a lot that we didn't get to on this. And again, learn.more at royalroads.ca. Elizabeth, any last words from yourself before we wrap it up?
Just have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Thanks for taking some time to zoom in and do some thinking time on this topic. And yes, I already have it on my list that maybe we need to do this again soon. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone on the line and on the recording, and we'll see you next time. Take care.